All right, this is the last podcast for STEM Bio, Chapter 18, Section 4, Ecosystem Recycling. There are four main cycles that we need to know. There are cycles where substances pass between the living environment and the non-living world. These are water cycle, which you've learned already, the carbon cycle, which you are familiar with a little bit, the nitrogen cycle, which might be new, and the phosphorus cycle, which might be new, but is minor. The nitrogen cycle is the hardest one. Okay, so basically we're just going to go through those four. The first one is the water cycle. The key processes you should know for the water cycle are evaporation, which is liquid water to water vapor, transpiration, which is the water lost from a tree leaf, precipitation, which is water released from the clouds in the form of rain, freezing rain, sleet, hail, or snow. Also, you should see runoff, which is when the water is running off and going down to the lakes. Percolation, which is when it gets down into the soil. So you should understand that transpiration, precipitation, water vapor, the rain, evaporate. You should understand how this whole thing works. Okay, here we go.
Evaporation occurs when liquid water from the Earth's surface and from living organisms changes into water vapor. Condensation occurs when water vapor cools and changes into liquid water droplets that form clouds in the atmosphere. Precipitation is rain, snow, sleet, or hail that falls from clouds onto the Earth's surface. Runoff is water that flows across land and collects in rivers, streams, and eventually returns to the ocean. Infiltration is the movement of water into the ground due to the pull of gravity. Percolation is the downward movement of water through pores and other spaces in soil due to gravity. The water cycle is the continuous movement of water from the atmosphere to Earth and back.
Okay. Let's go back here. All right, next one is the carbon cycle. This one deals with photosynthesis and cellular respiration, which we learned. Those are the two main components of the carbon cycle. Photosynthesis is when autotrophs use carbon dioxide to make carbohydrates, like glucose. Cellular respiration is when heterotrophs and autotrophs both break down these carbohydrates, into carbon dioxide and water. For cellular respiration, here's a review. It's basically the opposite of photosynthesis. It's done by all living things. It breaks down glucose into carbon dioxide and water. There is your equation, adding the 36 ATP at the end. This is what you learned in Let's Try. The reactants from this equation, make sure you understand the word reactants again, is glucose and oxygen. The products are carbon dioxide and water, and obviously ATP. Besides glucose and oxygen, there is also enzymes involved that are in the mitochondria that are also required. All right, this is a continuous cycle. Photosynthesis and respiration form a continuous cycle. Okay? The product, the end result of one, which for cellular respiration is carbon dioxide and water, those are the products of cellular respiration. Those are the reactants for the other process, which is photosynthesis. So photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide and water, and cellular respiration requires the products of photosynthesis, which is oxygen and glucose. Okay, there are human influences on the carbon cycle. In the last 150 years, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has risen more than 30%, as you can see. This is due to burning of fossil fuels and deforestation. Okay, so here is the carbon cycle diagram. You've got cellular respiration occurring from plants and animals, which is producing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. You have photosynthesis taking that carbon dioxide and producing oxygen. There's dissolved carbon dioxide in the water. You have combustion occurring. You have fossil fuels being combusted. You have death and decomposition also involved with this process. Okay. Let's watch the next one.
All living things are made of molecules that contain carbon. The movement of carbon from the non-living environment into living things and back is called the carbon cycle. Carbon moves from the atmosphere into living things through photosynthesis. During photosynthesis, plants, algae, and some bacteria use carbon dioxide to make sugar. Many animals get the carbon they need by eating plants. Some of the carbon returns to the atmosphere through respiration. During respiration, organisms break down sugar molecules to release energy. Carbon dioxide and water are released as byproducts. Eventually, organisms die. When organisms decompose, some of the carbon is returned to the atmosphere. Under certain conditions, decaying organisms form fossil fuels. Humans burn fossil fuels to produce power. During combustion, fossil fuels are converted to carbon dioxide and water. The carbon dioxide is returned to the atmosphere. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can then pass through the cycle again.
Okay. All right, let's go back here. All right, the next one is nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen in the atmosphere, which you might know is about 79% in the air, it's unusable to us. It's unusable to plants and to animals. Therefore, we need nitrogen. It must be changed into a usable form that plants and animals can use. This process of converting the nitrogen that's in the air, nitrogen gas, to nitrate, which is usable by plants and animals, is called nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixing bacteria, so these are bacteria that do this process, are extremely important in the nitrogen cycle because they'll take the nitrogen gas that's in the atmosphere and change it into nitrate, which is the usable form of nitrogen for plants. All right, so these are the processes in recycling nitrogen. First one is ammonification. Bodies of dead organisms contain nitrogen. It's in our protein and our DNA, urine, and in our waste. Decomposers will break down these materials and release the nitrogen they contain as ammonia, which is NH3. This ammonia, NH3, in the soil will then become ammonium, which is NH4 with a +1 charge. Okay, nitrification is another process. The bacteria in the soil take up this ammonium and they chemically change it into nitrite, which is NO2, and nitrite, which is NO3. Next one is denitrification. Anaerobic bacteria will break down these nitrates and release nitrogen gas back up into the atmosphere. Plants can absorb nitrates from the soil, but animals cannot. So the only way we can get that nitrogen is by eating plants. Okay, so here's our diagram. So you have nitrogen in the atmosphere, okay, and nitrogen fixation is going to occur. They need to change this nitrogen gas into ammonia, which is usable. So nitrogen fixation is going to do that. These are bacteria that are in the soil and in plant roots are going to do nitrogen fixation and change nitrogen into ammonia. And then you also have decomposition occurring, which takes the nitrogen from dead decaying animals and change that through ammonification into ammonia. Ammonia then can be changed through assimilation or through nitrification into nitrates and nitrites, which is on the diagram. And then nitrates can be recycled back into the atmosphere through denitrification. Okay, let's watch this one.
Nitrogen is very important to living things. The movement of nitrogen from the non-living environment into living things and back again is called the nitrogen cycle. About 79% of the atmosphere is made up of nitrogen gas. However, most organisms cannot use nitrogen gas directly. Certain bacteria in soil and in some plant roots are able to convert the nitrogen gas to ammonia.
Okay, so that is nitrogen fixation.
Other bacteria in the soil, called nitrifying bacteria, convert the ammonia to another type of nitrogen compound called nitrates. Plants absorb some of the ammonia and nitrates. Most animals get the nitrogen they need by eating plants. When plants and animals die or give off waste, decomposers convert the stored nitrogen back to ammonia. Nitrifying bacteria convert the ammonia to nitrates. Another type of bacteria in the soil, called denitrifying bacteria, converts the nitrates to nitrogen gas. The nitrogen gas returns to the atmosphere, where it can pass through the cycle again.
Okay. All right, lastly is the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is needed. If you think about it, it's in our bones, it's in our teeth, in our DNA and our RNA. You have phosphate sugar backbone, right? Plants get phosphorus they need from the soil and water, no problem. And animals get it by eating the plants. When rocks erode, phosphorus gets into the soil and water in the form of phosphate, PO4. Plants will absorb this phosphorus in the soil through the roots. Phosphorus is also added to the soil and water through decomposition. Some phosphorus gets into groundwater from fertilizer that's washing off the land. Okay, so here's a diagram. You have herbivores and carnivores giving off phosphorus as a waste product. You have the weathering of phosphate from rocks, getting phosphate into the soil, and then plants absorb that, and then we eat the plants, and that's how we get the phosphorus back. And that concludes Chapter 18 podcast.